Hello, readers and writers, and welcome to Lesson 5 of your ELA School Away from School. I am Mr. Driver, and I will be your virtual teacher for today's daily lesson. Let's start with some guiding questions. What journey does food take before it gets to your plate? And how do we make decisions about what we eat? You'll notice these are the same guiding questions from last week, and they will repeat themselves as we continue to explore the topic. All right, time to get some materials for today's daily lesson. You're going to need your copy of the text, which is called Essay, How Corn Took Spotlight in American Diet, but Not in Europe, your copy of lesson number 5, and the lesson number 5 note catcher, as well as a pencil. Go ahead and pause the video here and make sure you have everything for today. We have 2 learning targets for today's work. I can determine the central idea of an informational text. Remember, the central message is a big idea that the author wants you to understand and take away from reading a text. And the second one is I can cite text-based evidence that provides the strongest support for my analysis of a text. When you analyze or analysis of a text, you're basically reading it closely and trying to find sentences within the paragraphs that will best support the central idea or message that the author wants you to take away. Let's make sure we keep this learning target or these learning targets in mind during all of today's work. First, we will do a close read on the article, Essay, How Corn Took Spotlight in American Diet, but Not in Europe. As I read aloud the article, please follow along with your eyes on the words that are being spoken. Take a moment to get your article out. It's important to hear that the article is read in its entirety before we start to examine section by section. Feel free to pause the video or replay it as needed. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Essay, How Corn Took Spotlight in American Diet, but Not in Europe. In 1493, Christopher Columbus returned to Europe with much astounding news and a pocket full of corn seeds. He had learned about many things during his travels to the New World, but few were as exciting as the promising grain he had encountered for the first time. It was delicious, Columbus said, and could help feed a lot of people. The only problem was that Columbus had left behind a fairly important bit of information. He didn't take back the knowledge of how to process it, said Betty Fussell, the author of The Story of Corn, which chronicles the grain's several thousand-year history. His seemingly small omission probably changed the course of history. Over the next few hundred years, most of Europe grew to misunderstand corn rather than to embrace it. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the story of the grain followed a different path. Corn thrived and eventually found its way to the very center of the American diet. Today, the United States is the largest producer and consumer of corn, and by a long shot. Corn is in the sodas Americans drink and the potato chips they snack on. It's in hamburgers and French fries, sauces and salad dressings, baked goods, breakfast cereals, virtually all poultry, and even in most fish. The grain is so widely used that it would take longer to list the foods that contain traces of it than to pinpoint the ones that do not. Our entire diet has been colonized by this one plant, journalist and food expert Michael Pollan remarked in 2003. Mass production boosted popularity. Corn was not always so omnipresent, however. It took time for European settlers to warm to it. Until the 1800s, corn was eaten mostly by the poor. It was cheap and an easy to grow crop, consumed by farmers and fed to prisoners. Slowly but surely, however, the grain made its way onto the dining tables of families all over the country. In the 1920s and 1930s, scientists discovered a way to boost corn production to a level that was previously unthinkable. They bred new strains that had larger ears and could be grown closer together, which allowed farmers to produce a lot more corn without more land. In the following decades, the number of bushels of corn per acre doubled, and then continued to rise each year, as Paul Roberts wrote in his 2009 book, The End of Food. Corn yields have continued to rise ever since. Crop is very inexpensive. Above all, what has allowed corn to seep into just about every food Americans eat today is the fact that it is so inexpensive. At present, a bushel of corn costs about $4, much less than soybeans or wheat. And the price is falling. The most striking thing about the corn grown in America today is how little of it we actually eat. Less than 10% of the corn used in the United States is directly ingested by humans. The bulk is either turned into ethanol to use as fuel or fed to the hundreds of millions of animals we raise. Cows, chickens, pigs, and even fish, which are fed pellets made largely of corn, eat several times the amount of the grain people consume each year. Three main types of corn. There are many kinds of corn, but the most common forms can be divided into three general types. The first is sweet corn, which Americans grill on the cob in the summer and boil or bake during the rest of the year. The most beloved variety, it accounts for only about 1% of the corn grown in America. Flint corn, which has a soft center and a harder outer shell, is what most people know as popcorn. It became popular in the 1960s after Jiffy Pop, which cooked the kernels in aluminum foil on the stovetop, was introduced. Its popularity rose further in the 1970s and 1980s, shortly after the introduction of the microwave. Today, much like sweet corn, Flint accounts for a steady but comparatively tiny portion of the US corn crop. Invisible, but found everywhere. Then there is dent corn, also known as field corn, which is the most important kind. It accounts for the vast majority of corn grown in America today, as well as the vast majority of the corn Americans eat indirectly. It is in most animals we eat because it is fed to most animals we raise for slaughter. It is in most of the beverages we drink because the high fructose corn syrup, which is derived from field corn, is the most commonly used commercial sweetener. It is even in our cheese because our cows munch on it instead of grazing on grass. It is largely invisible, in other words, but also absolutely central to the American diet. It's in almost every product in the supermarket today, Fusel said. Corn never did become popular on European dining tables. As American-style processed foods spread around the world, however, cheap corn is spreading too and finding its way into stomachs everywhere. Now, notice there is a diagram at the bottom of your page that is titled How Kernels Develop. If you look closely at the picture, you'll notice different stages of how kernels develop. Starting at the top, there is the silking stage, ovules. Then to the right of that silking stage is the blister stage, which has fertilized kernels. Next to that is the milk stage, which is best for eating. At the bottom of the page, you'll notice the dough stage. And to its left, there is the dent stage, and above that, kernels finally reach maturity. Now that we have read the text together, I want you to think about a few questions. What is this article mainly about? What extra information does the title, subheadings, and pictures give you? And what was the most important piece of information you read? Pause the video here as you think about each of these questions. Now it's time to have a discussion with your family member, caregiver, or friend. Remember, the central message is a big idea that the author wants you to understand and take away from reading a text. Read the questions aloud. The first question, what do you think the central message of this article is? Next one, what details from the text make you think that? And the last one, what new information did you learn? Go ahead and pause the video here while you discuss this with somebody else. Please take out your Lesson 5 note catcher. Using the Lesson 5 note catcher, write down the central idea of the text. Use at least 2 details or evidence from the text to support your initial response. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of give a quick example of this. A lot of times you can find this central idea, which is what the author wants you to mainly take away from reading something. You can look at the titles and the subheadings. So the bold words, that are underlined or at the top or for the subsections, you want to read each of these. But be careful though, because sometimes subheadings, which are the ones beneath the title, may actually be more supporting details. But at other times they can also offer glimpses into what the central message is. Specific details that are going to help support your central message or central idea can be found a lot of times in the paragraphs. If all else fails in trying to find what the central message is, read the introduction and concluding paragraphs. Many times you'll find a main idea or central idea in one of the sentences because it offers it like a thesis sentence that kind of begins the informational text or ends it. But once again, you want to just find out what is the author wants you to mainly take away from reading this, and then think of at least 2 sentences that can be found, or sections of pieces of sentences that can help support this. Go ahead and pause the video here while you complete this work. All right, time to wrap up today's lesson. Let's think about what you did and how you did with today's learning targets. I can determine the central idea of an informational text. And the second one, I can cite text-based evidence that provides the strongest support for my analysis of a text. As a closing, share your writing with someone and tell them why you chose to write what you did. Also, remember to read a book today for 20 minutes. You can also read with a family member, caregiver, or friend. I also want you to practice your fluency by reading the article from today for 1 minute. You can use a timer or have someone count to 60. After 1 minute, count the words you read and write the number at the top of your text. Later in the week, do this again and see how much you've improved. Thanks for learning with me today. Tomorrow, lesson 6, we will dive deeper into this week's article and look at the beginning sections to kind of try to understand what the author wants you to take away. All right, go ahead and have a great rest of your day and see you tomorrow.